I'm Aija. I'm a college student at NYU. I grew up in New York and I went to high school in California. When I was 16, I decided to start writing this book. I'm going to tell you why. When I was 8 years old and I lived in New York, I started getting bullied. I had a lisp, I was different, but I was also kind of a regular kid. I loved to write and tell stories, to act. I was very creative. And I think sometimes people are afraid of what they don't understand. So I started getting bullied, and I was told to kill myself, to die, that I was ugly or fat. And when I moved to California at the age of 14, I thought this was my new beginning. I thought that everything was going to be okay, but it wasn't. And I started getting cyberbullied for the way I looked, the way I spoke, my interests in creative fields. And when I was 15, a girl that I had never met who attended my old school dressed up as me for Halloween. And in that moment, it was my most challenging bullying experience. It was my most challenging moment of my life, but it was also the moment that I decided that I was going to do something about this. So a few weeks later, I saw a poster for the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, and they were accepting screenplays. And I had never really written anything before, but I decided that I was going to write a screenplay about bullying. And my screenplay wound up winning. It was made into a film, and I got to act in it. So on that moment, on that stage, I realized that I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. So about 2 years later, I saw a news story about a boy that committed suicide, and he was 16, and it broke my heart because he looked like the type of boy that would never be bullied. He just looked perfect and handsome and like an athlete, and I couldn't understand why this had happened to him. Why had he lost all of his hope? So on that night at 16 years old, I decided to start writing the book that I never had but I always needed, which was the Survival Guide to Bullying. So it's been quite a long journey and quite an exciting one. And before I continue telling you about my story, I'm going to share something with you called a roem, a rap poem. So I started writing these when I was 16 because I wanted to find a way to communicate to the kids in the school that were still going through it, but in a way that was catchy and exciting. So in my book, I have 10 roems, and they're about 1 minute to 2 minutes long, but the one I'm going to perform for you is actually the one that I am doing on my school tour, and it's 10 minutes long, and it'll tell you my whole story, so I hope you enjoy it. People used to tell me to get over it. Just kids being kids, messing around and saying this and saying this. It's been nearly 3 years since I've looked at myself and wondered, is it worth it? I feel strong now. I no longer hear my bullies when I'm standing in a crowd. No one is saying, Aija, you are worthless. Why are you still here? No one likes you on this earth. This thing inside my mind that used to make it so hard to see that it was all just a moment in time is gone now. I feel stronger than I've ever been, happier than I've ever known, but something still haunts me each and every time I see a kid walking down the street, head bowed, turning away from the crowd, because I know this kid. I know how their heart aches in pain, and the world looks 3 shades darker each and every day, and they hear the words their bullies always say on repeat in their minds. It's like time stands still. 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know how to do this anymore. I was 8 years old the first time I was told I was worthless. By a girl my age, we were just in 3rd grade. I was new at the school, didn't know much, just followed the rules. I'd sit at the playground and drown my sorrows in fantastical stories about other worlds. I was too young to know that my writing was an internal mural of pain. I was just trying to be the same as everyone else. Have you ever hid what made you wonderful? Just so you would fit in and be a regular kid? I did, and I did. For 5 years, I pretended like I was ordinary, in hopes that what made me extraordinary would disappear with the hatred my bullies regurgitated for me to hear. I would have to plug my ears because I would hear their words on repeat until I collapsed into tears. I would sit in the bathroom stall at school, staring at the vandalized walls and try to silence my tears as the girls in my class tore me to shreds a few feet away in front of the mirror, while coating their face in makeup, as if it was just that easy. But I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything because I was just 10 years old and I didn't know. I just didn't know if this was how life was going to be. I remember it so perfectly. I'd be on the playground dressed in my skirt and collared shirt, excited for the recess adventures that were to come, but they weren't to come. There was a girl, let's call her Marie. Marie's job was to keep me away from everyone else. I would literally be standing alone as Marie controlled the ground between my feet and my classmates, as if to not contaminate them with some infectious disease that I did not have. You see, I thought I was a freak, and I turned the other cheek on myself. I'm not going to lie, I denied the fact. I'm not bullied. It was all an act. I wanted the world to think I was okay. Why? It's more than obvious. I wanted to be okay. No one told me happiness wasn't a magic trick. I thought I could wave that magic stick and poof, like that, my world would turn from gray to gold. It didn't, and the bullying was getting old. I told myself, Asia, it's gonna get better. It's gotta get better. Take off that baggy sweater. You're not fat. And write that letter to your future self. You're gonna do big things, spread those wings. Every king has had a dark night. This isn't your life. And I thought to myself, that Asia is right. 11 years old, and you might think, she's all good. She just said she's going to spread her wings and fly, and everything is going to be all right, but that's a lie. You see, I tried really hard to smile through each day and be okay, but I'd sit down in class feeling like broken glass, being told I was a nothing and that I should go and die, and I tried to stand by and be that tough guy. I wasn't going to comply. Something in me was awake. I wanted to survive. I wanted to be alive and do something with my life. But I didn't realize what was at stake. I didn't know how to communicate. I thought I was strong. I was so wrong. I was about to break, and my parents stood by wanting to make it all better, ready to make it all better. Asia, write them an open letter. Let me try to explain. There was something ingrained in my brain that told me not to complain and maintain the life I was living. And maybe a part of me was just not forgiving myself for being bullied. Because people don't just bully you for no reason, right? There must be a grain of truth in what they're saying. I used to believe that hate stemmed from some version of honesty. But honestly, why are they doing this to me? So I spent that year trying to make it clear. Was it my weight or the way I ate, my hair, the clothes I wear? What is that one thing that declared me a disparity? I started working on my skincare. I figured if I was blemish-free, no one could taunt me. I just wanted them to want me. A few weeks passed, my skin looked like freshly cleaned glass. I was still harassed. I was still an outcast. So I turned my attention on the invention of clothes. I figured if I dressed the same as the people who put me to shame, if I blended in, descended into their social ladder, I'd be too much a part of their pattern to be of much matter. You see, I didn't care whether I was invisible or not. I lived in a blind spot, thinking that if I was a nothing, it was better than being a something. What a dumb thing to think. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I lied to myself, I was never, ever going to be a nothing to nobody. 12 years old, and I decided to no longer be bold. Day to day, I was told that I was ugly, fat, worthless, basically fool's gold. I was crumbling inside, no longer felt the need to try. And then one day, someone said, Asia, go and die. And I thought to myself, why? I don't have a third eye. I'm no wise guy, just sitting here tongue-tied, wondering why. Have you ever just sat and wondered why? Raise your hand up high. In that moment when you can't even cry because everything in life feels like a lie, just stand by. Because life has a way of showing you beauty in darkness. It's nearby. I'll show you mine. 14 years old, I moved across the country to a place that was endlessly sunny. I decided to create a new Asia, a girl that everyone would love, sort of. I wore a mask every day, pretended I was okay, had friends who were cliche, and thought this would be enough to be okay. But did you know your shadow follows you? And no matter how hard you try, you can't get away. So I was haunted by my past, but not even ready for the major blast. 15. Now, to be clear, this year is hard for me to talk about. I still feel fear in here. On Halloween of my freshman year, a girl I had never met who attended my old school dressed up as me as her costume. And suddenly it was like someone pressed resume. I was all consumed by cyberbullying, harassment, and my past, by a feeling I had never felt. You know what that was? The realization that I had never dealt with what came from the bullying, so I melted inside and started to hide from everything: family, friends, food, fun. I guess I thought I deserved no one. But then something magical begun. There was this feeling inside. It was this need to be alive. It was this need to survive. And when you feel that fire, you know it's going to be okay. It's like suddenly you feel desired and required and inspired. And I began to write all day, all night. I created my own light at the end of that dark tunnel. That year, I wound up winning an international film festival for a movie that I wrote. And on that day, standing on that stage, I thought of this quote: I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. And that goes for everyone. That next year, my direction veered. It started as a regular day. Okay, went to school, acted like I was cool, got home, went to my desk, opened my laptop to see what homework I had to address. The news popped up, and now I digress. He was the first story. 16 years old, he couldn't hold on any longer, couldn't be any stronger. It said, suicide due to bullying. And I knew I couldn't wait any longer. You see, I didn't know the boy in the news story who took his life, who lost his strife, but there was something about this boy that destroyed me. He looked like the type that would get his master's degree, race at the Grand Prix, sail the South China Sea, and yet he lost his fight and decided to flee. It broke me because I know what it's like to lose your fight, and I know what it's like to take back your life. But how can I let kids cry every day without telling them that it's going to be okay? So I spent weeks wrestling my own mind to the point where I would just go to bed and cry because I couldn't find the answer. And then one day, my mom came into my room to say, you gotta be brave. Tell your story. If not you, who will tell the story of the 13 million American kids every year who no longer know what it's like to smile from ear to ear? And suddenly, it all became clear. There was a commotion and motion inside my brain. I felt like I was going insane. And she said to me, who do you want to be? What do you want to achieve? What do you believe? I want to be who I needed when I was younger. I want to achieve more than I ever thought was possible. I believe in standing up, standing up, standing up. I'm not backing up, easing up, or shutting up. I'm going to make a change. So I put pen to paper, rearranged the thoughts that poured from my brain, and created a book that goes by the name, The Survival Guide to Bullying. The book Aija needed when she was 10, 12, 15. It just came a few years late, but hopefully it would show everyone else how to communicate, love your weight, your sexual orientation, or your growth rate. Because it doesn't matter what anyone says to you. You are the pilot to your own life. You decide how to fly your flight. You decide if you're going to walk the road alone each night or have someone by your side to tell you it's going to be all right. Because it is going to be all right. Whether you are gay, straight, trans, lost, found, alone, sad, scared, or different, we are all different, unfinished, sufficient. The popular kid that you so want to be has their own insecurities. Trust me, because I have been popular and I have been unpopular. I know both sides to that coin. Neither is easy, neither I would rejoin. We all fight our own battles each day. We all must be accepting of our wounds that don't always fade away. So I'll leave you with this and say, if there was only one thing I had left to say about bullying, it would be this. I promised myself that I would take a stand, try to save others by holding out my hand. But I cannot fix this problem on my own. I need people like you to get up, hold your head high, raise your hand, and say, I will not let another kid feel like someone else's prey. Whether you are the bully, the bullied, or the bystander, today is a new day. Stand up Don't back down, and be brave. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm sorry, I have a bit of a cold, so I was hoping I wouldn't lose my voice, and I didn't, so that's good. If I do now a little bit, then that's why. But thank you so, so much for your applause and for your support in my message. So before I performed that roem, where I left off was that I had written this screenplay, and then at 16 I decided to start writing this book. I realized that if I did nothing about the bullying that had happened to me, then I was just as bad as the people that bullied me. Because I knew what it took to survive. I knew how other kids could get through it, yet I wasn't doing anything about it. So at 16, with no experience in writing a book, or really writing anything, I decided to start writing a book. I wrote it for about 2 years. I interviewed professionals, I spoke to parents, I spoke to other kids that were bullied, I spoke to teachers, psychologists, and I really wanted to create that guide that I never had, but I always needed. So I finished it at 18, and I actually self-published it as a little ebook, and it came out on Amazon and iBooks and all of that. And 1 month after I self-published it, I started getting this overwhelming response from people all over the world who were reading it. Now, I didn't even know how they were finding it, but there were kids in Indonesia and India and all of these places who were reading it and telling me that my book was helping them through the most difficult part of their lives. It was saving their life. It was changing their future. And I was very lucky because in that same month where I got this wonderful influx of messages, Scholastic came along and bought my book. So it was a dream come true for a little 8-year-old girl who had been bullied to have this piece that she had worked so hard on to be published by Scholastic. So I moved to New York in January of last year and started working with Scholastic, and I also sold my book to 6 foreign countries. And I worked with a woman named Dr. Deborah Temkin, who vetted my book, and she works with the US Department of Education and the Obama administration. And I loved speaking to her because I got to hear this brilliant perspective about bullying at kind of a national level, and I got to see how that meshed with what I wrote and how I could improve best on my book. So my book came out this summer in July, and honestly, the response was nothing I could have ever dreamed of. Immediately after it came out, I started getting thousands of messages from kids all over the world, but not just kids, adults and teachers and parents and all of these people who were telling me that this was the book they needed to have that conversation with their child or to help that student in their class, or from kids. I mean, about 2 days ago, I got an email from a girl in Morocco who was reading my book, and she told me that my book had been that life-saving device that she had been waiting for. So this outpour of messages has been really remarkable and a dream come true. But the best part of all of this is that I've gotten to speak at schools. In the last 3 weeks, I think I've spoken to maybe 10 or 12,000 kids all over the country. And I'm still continuing to speak at schools for the rest of the year and into next year, and it's really wonderful. I've spoken to kids as young as 8 years old and as old as 18 years old, and I performed this roem that I just did for all of you, and the response is always the same. It's these kids get up and they start cheering and screaming, and it's just incredible to see that bullying is such a big problem, but there's also so much support. There are so many kids who are kind of joining this movement to make a difference. So I'm going to talk now a bit about bullying and tips and kind of my perspective, I'm sorry about that, on all of this. So every year, 13 million American kids are bullied. And every single day, 160,000 kids skip school because they're too afraid of being bullied. So obviously, this is an enormous problem, but it's also happening in countries all over the world. The first country to approach me to buy my book was Japan, and then Russia. These countries that I never could have imagined would be interested in my book, but it's really this international epidemic. The 5 biggest problems I see when I speak to schools and I speak to kids is this. One, kids don't communicate. And I was one of those kids. I didn't know how to have that conversation with my teachers or my parents. I was so afraid of what they would think of me, or of how I would be judged, or maybe it was my fault. And so I didn't have that conversation. And I think that is probably the most challenging part to all of this, because I'm sure as educators in your field, if a kid isn't talking, then it's very hard to solve the problem. So in my book, I have a whole chapter called Getting Help, and that's where I talk about the many different ways that kids can get help from their teachers, from their parents, from any trusted adult in their life, to kind of break through this wall that they've built. So for me, I think I would have really benefited from probably writing a poem, or writing a letter, or not just having this serious sit-down conversation. And so that's probably the biggest problem I see, is that kids don't communicate. The other thing is, I think parents don't know how to handle this issue. And it's challenging because a lot of parents don't want to look at it objectively, so that they want to think that perhaps their kid is innocent. And I think that's where the problem comes in, is that all kids can be the bully, the bullied, and the bystander. And it's actually a very, very common theme. And I was a bystander before. I'm not sure if I ever bullied, but I know that kids can have many, many roles. And so I think parents need to know how to have that conversation, and how to kind of break through that boundary between them and their kids with this sensitive issue. The other problem I see is that teachers don't always have the right training to kind of intervene in bullying in schools. I was in a school in California where, while I was speaking, bullying was happening in the classroom. And the teacher was sitting there and not doing anything. And I don't blame her at all. I think that it's a very odd situation to have a speaker come to your classroom and then have bullying happen and not know how to tackle it properly. So I think that is another issue. The other problem is that kids don't stand up for each other, because there is this fear of, if I stand up for someone else, then I'm going to be bullied more, or I'll get in trouble, or I'll be a tattletale if I tell someone. So it's breaking down that issue as well. And then the last problem I see is that there isn't always a zero tolerance policy with bullying in schools. Now, even though I said all of these problems, I really believe that bullying can be fixed, and I really believe that it's a three-pronged approach. So I'm going to talk now about the solutions I see. I think that with parents, with educators, and with kids, bullying can ultimately end. But it is this kind of team effort that needs to happen. The first thing, as I said before, is communication. In my book, I talk about kids creating a top 5 list of the people that they trust, whether it's their teacher, their parent, their coach, whoever it is, and going to that person and having an open dialogue. Whether it's through a letter or an email or just a conversation in person. But I think even more important than establishing who that person is creating a safe bond where that kid can go to that trusted adult and tell them what's going on, and not be fearful that they're going to tell someone else and the bullying will escalate. A lot of times what I hear from kids when I speak to them is that if they tell an adult, it's going to get worse. They're going to make them confront their bully, and the bullying is going to get worse, and they're going to get in trouble, and so they're too afraid to speak up. So I think creating this really safe bond, and that's something that my mom did with me, where I knew that if I went to her, my secret was safe with her, and I could really, really trust her, and I knew that she wouldn't do anything without my permission. And that happened kind of later on in my experience of being bullied, but I do think that bond is really crucial. Another thing I think is important is to educate parents on this problem. So my book is written to teenagers, to kids, but it's also written to educators and to parents so that they can peek into their kids' lives, into their students' lives, and understand more what's going on, and understand how to fix this problem, how to talk to kids being bullied. And I think that that's another thing, is learning how to talk as parents or as educators. What is the right way, to not bombard the student, to not bombard the kid, will make this a much more fluid, easier to have conversation. Another problem, I think, is this zero tolerance policy. If we can fix this, if we can, as soon as a kid goes to school, bullying is not allowed, and as soon as it happens, it is stopped. I think, honestly, kids won't go out of their way to bully if this zero tolerance policy is implemented at a very young age. I often see kids that I speak to who, they'll come to me afterwards and they'll say, I think that I'm a bully. And how do I stop that? And when I tell them about the importance of kindness, about the importance of treating other people the way that they want to be treated, and just being aware of their behavior and their actions, and how they can change someone's life just by being kind. I always get messages afterwards from these kids who tell me that now they've become friends with the people that they bullied, or that, they weren't friends with before. So I do think that creating this environment where conversation can be had and where there is no tolerance for bullying is ultimately where we will see a much better and a bully-free environment. Now I want to talk about cyberbullying. So I believe that cyberbullying is the most dangerous form of bullying. I think it's 24/7, it often is anonymous, and it doesn't end. And when I was cyberbullied, it felt like the world was against me. It felt like I was being bullied by 300 or 400 people, and ultimately it probably was just 2 or 3 people. So I think this is something that is very challenging to tackle because social media is increasing at such a rapid rate, and there's always a new platform, and there's always a new thing. I mean, Facebook isn't even used in middle school that much anymore, and that's what I had in middle school. So that's what is challenging about social media. But I think there is a way to work with social media because it's not going away. I think it's important to accept the fact that social media is here to stay and it's going to continue, and to encourage kids to kind of be their own superhero on social media. So in my book a lot I tell kids how to become their own superhero, how to take charge of their life. So what I mean by this in terms of social media is when kids see bullying happen online, I think it's very important for them to report it, even if it's not happening to themselves. There are these report and block buttons on every platform, and it's very easy to just send in the report or send in the block. And that's just doing one step in protecting another person and not being a bystander online. The other thing is to take pictures, I think, of all of the cyberbullying that is seen online. And whether you're an educator that sees it or a kid, that's proof right there that can be used to go back to the problem, revisit it, and ultimately tackle it. Because a lot of the times, if a post is deleted, it's going to be very challenging to go find that post again. And then the last thing I think is very important is something I talk about in my book called going dark or going semi-dark, which means if you're bullied on, for example, Instagram, then you want to take a vacation from that platform. And it could be 2 days, 3 days, it could be 2 weeks, but I always tell kids that it's so important to really treat themselves as their own number one priority. And social media will always be there, and they can always go back to it, but to not ever let anyone continuously cyberbully them or continuously bully them. And then the last thing I'll talk about is bystanders, upstanders, and mob mentality. So I talk a lot about this in my book, and when I speak at schools, 50% of the time, if someone intervenes in a bullying situation, that kid being bullied will never be bullied again. So it is so important for someone to intervene, and I always tell kids about how to be an upstander, how to take that chance and be really brave, because they could be saving someone's life, they could be changing someone's life. And there was one boy who was really kind to me when I was in middle school, and I was being bullied. And he never stood up for me publicly, but every day when I came to school, he would ask me how my day was, and he would let me sit next to him in class. And he changed my life, and I write about him in my book, because I don't know how I would have gotten through it without that one person, because I knew I could get up and go to school, and there was one person who was going to be really kind to me, and I could get through the day because of him. So being a bystander and getting to the point of being an upstander is something that is a game changer, in my opinion. So now I'll just talk about how schools have been using my book. So as I've been speaking at schools, it's really been a really wonderful and interesting journey to see how everything has kind of taken into effect. So I started speaking at schools in September. And immediately after I went into the schools, the educators started including the books into the curriculum. So my book was starting to get taught in schools, in different schools across the country. So I would come in after my book was taught and speak and do my roem, and talk obviously a little differently than I'm speaking to you today. and then have a Q&A with the kids. And their reaction was incredible. And then I would leave the school, and I would get like 500 or 600 messages from these kids continuously telling me every day how they are not being a bystander, how they've decided to be an upstander, what they are doing, how they saved someone online from cyberbullying, and kind of updating me probably every day for weeks on end about what they are doing to be part of this movement and make a change. But my book has a bunch of different chapters. I'm sure you've seen one of them being cyberbullying, where I talk extensively about that, as well as fears and dealing with fears, because I think that that's another really challenging thing in not only having an open conversation with kids, but with allowing kids to speak up in the classroom or just be a regular happy student, because fears can be so crushing. And believe me, I have dealt with my fair share of fears. So I talk about dealing with fears, communicating, creativity, and finding an outlet, whether it's robotics or science or math or sports. My creativity and my outlet was writing and was theater, and that's how I got through part of this as well. So all of these things are topics that I've been working with schools on across the country when I go in and beforehand and afterwards to just continue this movement, because I don't look at bullying as something that is a major kind of, what's the word? I don't look at bullying as something that we are never going to be able to fix, because I do think that we can fix it, and I do think that we can create environments in schools where kids will go and not be afraid to be bullied, and they will volunteer in class to answer questions and not be afraid of what other people think or how they judge them. So it's all about, this three-pronged approach, as I discussed before, and really not letting bullying kind of slip by and ignoring it, because if we do tackle it, if we do take a strong approach, it won't be as rampant as it is now.